The rain hammered against the diner window, like a warning he should have heeded. Jake Morrison wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, his hands moving on autopilot, while his mind stayed trapped 10 years in the past, the night he made a choice that cost him everything. Outside, beneath the flickering neon sign, a small wheelchair sat motionless in the downpour. A girl, no older than 8, slumped forward, her clothes soaked through. He'd seen desperate situations before. He'd caused some of them, but something about the way she sat there silent, accepting, as if she'd learned long ago that help never comes, made his chest tighten. He pushed open the door. The girl looked up, and for a split second, Jake saw his own daughter's eyes staring back at him. Not the Sophie who lived with him now, angry and distant, but the one he'd lost the night his wife died. What he didn't know, saving this child would drag him back into the world he'd spent a decade running from. And the woman who would walk through his door in 20 minutes. She held the key to both his redemption and his destruction. The bell above the door chimed as Jake pushed it open with his shoulder, balancing a steaming mug of hot chocolate in one hand. The rain had soaked through his shirt in the 10 seconds it took to cross the sidewalk, but he barely noticed. The girl in the wheelchair hadn't moved. Her dark hair hung in wet strings across her face, and her small hands gripped the armrests with a kind of quiet determination that made Jake's throat close up. He crouched down beside her, holding out the mug, and waited. She didn't look at him at first, just stared at the steam rising from the cup like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "My caregiver went to get my medicine," she said to wait here. Jake glanced up and down the empty street. The pharmacy was 3 blocks away, and it had been closed for an hour. He felt something cold settle in his stomach, not anger exactly, but a weary recognition. He'd seen this before too. People who took jobs caring for vulnerable kids because it paid better than retail, then treated those kids like inconvenient packages. He stood up, joints protesting, and held out his hand. "How about you wait inside where it's dry? I've got a booth by the heater, and I make a pretty decent grilled cheese if you're hungry." The girl looked up at him then, really looked, and Jake saw the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing risk against cold and hunger, trying to decide if this stranger was dangerous or just tired. Something about that look, that premature adult wariness in a child's face, made Jake want to punch something. Instead, he smiled. "I'm Jake. I own this place. My daughter Sophie is upstairs doing homework. She's 7. You look about her age, maybe a little older." The girl's expression shifted slightly. Not quite trust, but something close to curiosity. She reached for the mug with both hands, and Jake noticed the way her fingers trembled not from cold, but from something else. Some kind of muscle condition, maybe. She took a sip, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there were tears streaming down her cheeks. Not sad tears, relief tears. The kind that come when someone's been holding themselves together for so long that the smallest kindness cracks them open. Jake felt his own eyes burn and looked away quickly, pretending to check the street again. "So," he said, keeping his voice light, "you got a name, or should I just call you Kid?" She smiled for the first time, just a flicker. Lily Parker." Jake pushed the wheelchair toward the door, and Lily didn't protest. "Well, Lily Parker, let's get you out of this rain. I've got a feeling your caregiver might be a while." Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and frying onions, the permanent scent of a place that had served working people for 40 years. Jake settled Lily at the corner booth, the one with the best view of the street so she could watch for her caregiver, and went to work on the grill. He moved through the familiar motions: bread, butter, cheese, flip, while keeping one eye on the girl. She sat very still, the kind of stillness that suggested conserving energy was a learned survival skill. Her clothes were expensive, he noticed now. Designer labels on the jacket, good quality shoes. Not the kind of kid who should be sitting alone in the rain outside a rundown diner in this neighborhood. When he brought over the sandwich, she ate slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd been taught proper manners and actually remembered them. Between bites, she asked questions. What kind of diner was this? How long had he owned it? Did Sophie like school? Jake answered patiently, surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. Most kids her age either chattered nonstop or said nothing at all, but Lily asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. My mom works a lot, she said after a while, unprompted. She runs a big company, Parker Pharmaceuticals. She's trying to develop new heart medications. Her small fingers traced the rim of her empty mug. I have a heart condition. That's why I need medicine all the time. That's why I can't run or play like other kids. Jake felt something twist in his chest. He thought about Sophie upstairs, healthy and whole except for the anger that lived in her like a second heartbeat. He thought about all the things he'd taken for granted before everything fell apart. That must be hard, he said, and immediately felt stupid for such an inadequate response. But Lily just nodded like he'd said something profound. It's okay. Mom says I'm strong in other ways. She says the best kind of strength is the kind nobody can see. Before Jake could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, and he looked up to see a woman step inside. She was tall, probably late 30s, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than Jake's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, the same warm brown as Lily's, swept the diner with the kind of sharp assessment that made Jake straighten involuntarily. This was someone used to being in control, to making decisions worth millions of dollars, and right now, those eyes had found Lily, and gone very, very still. Lily. The woman's voice was calm, but Jake heard the crack underneath. Baby, are you all right? Lily's face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. Mom, this is Jake. He gave me hot chocolate and grilled cheese. His daughter is upstairs. The woman crossed the diner in 4 long strides, knelt beside the wheelchair, and ran her hands over Lily's arms and face like she was checking for injuries. Only when she seemed satisfied did she look up at Jake, and the gratitude in her eyes was so raw it made him uncomfortable. Thank you, she said, and her voice shook slightly. I got a call that Ellen Lily's caregiver had some kind of emergency and abandoned her post. I was in a board meeting downtown, and I broke every traffic law getting here. She stood up, and Jake saw her hands were trembling. I'm Victoria Parker, and I owe you more than I can say. Jake shrugged, suddenly aware of his stained apron and the fact that he probably smelled like fried food and old coffee. Just gave her a warm place to wait. Anyone would have done the same. Victoria's expression suggested she doubted that very much. She glanced around the diner, taking in the cracked vinyl booths and the ancient jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years, and something in her face softened. This is a good place, she said quietly. Safe. Jake thought about all the reasons that wasn't true the neighborhood, the occasional fights that spilled in from the bar next door, his own past lurking in every shadow, but he just nodded. Victoria reached for her purse, but Jake held up a hand. No charge. Just make sure that caregiver doesn't get the job back. Victoria's smile was sharp and cold. Oh, I can promise you that. They talked for a few more minutes while Lily finished her hot chocolate. Victoria explained that she'd been desperately searching for a reliable caregiver for weeks, someone who understood that Lily needed stability and routine, not just someone to clock in and out. She mentioned, almost casually, that she'd run a background check on any serious candidates because her daughter's safety was paramount. Jake felt his shoulders tense at that, but he kept his expression neutral. When they finally left, Victoria pausing at the door to thank him again, Jake stood at the window and watched them climb into a sleek black car that probably cost more than his entire building. He felt Sophie's presence before he heard her footsteps on the stairs. Was that the girl you were talking to? His daughter's voice was flat, carefully devoid of interest. She was getting good at that, pretending not to care about anything. Jake turned to face her. At 7 years old, Sophie looked so much like her mother it hurt. Same auburn hair, same stubborn chin, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. Yeah, her name's Lily. She was waiting for her mom in the rain. Sophie crossed her arms. You shouldn't have let her in. What if she was dangerous? Jake felt the familiar ache of trying to bridge the canyon between them. She's 8 years old and uses a wheelchair. I think we were safe. That's not the point. Sophie's voice rose slightly. You're always doing this, helping people, trying to fix things. It doesn't bring Mom back. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Jake wanted to say something, to explain that helping Lily had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with being human, but Sophie was already turning away, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. He listened to her bedroom door slam and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd ever find a way back to his daughter, if redemption was even possible for someone like him. 3 days later, Victoria Parker walked back into his diner. It was early afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner when the place was empty except for old Harold dozing in his usual booth. She was dressed more casually this time, jeans and a sweater, but she still carried herself like someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Jake looked up from restocking napkin dispensers and felt his stomach drop. She had the look of someone who'd discovered something important, and in his experience, that was never good news. We need to talk, Victoria said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. About your past. Jake's hands stilled. He set down the napkins very carefully and met her eyes. I figured you'd run a background check eventually. Victoria didn't flinch. I run them on everyone who comes near my daughter. It's not personal, but what I found. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Jake Morrison, former detective with the Metro Police, decorated for bravery twice, then fired 10 years ago for accepting bribes and allowing a major suspect to escape. That suspect, David Sterling, allegedly died in a car accident 3 months later. Your wife died the same night, killed in what police called a random mugging that was never solved. She leaned forward. Except David Sterling didn't die, did he? Jake felt the blood drain from his face. For a moment, the diner seemed to tilt sideways. What are you talking about? Victoria pulled out her phone and turned it toward him. On the screen was a surveillance photo from what looked like a corporate building. The image was grainy, but Jake would have recognized that face anywhere. Older, harder, but unmistakably David Sterling. The man Jake had taken money from, the man whose brother died during the arrest Jake had deliberately botched. The man who'd sworn revenge and then vanished into the night. This was taken 2 days ago at my company headquarters, Victoria said quietly. He's been working as a security consultant under an assumed name for the past 6 months. I didn't recognize him until I started digging into your history and saw his photo. He's been there the whole time, right under my nose. Jake's mind raced. David Sterling alive. David Sterling working for Victoria's company. David Sterling close to Lily. You need to fire him. Today. Now. I did. This morning. Victoria's expression was grim. He didn't take it well. Jake, I think he's been planning something. When I went through his work computer, I found files he shouldn't have had access to. Research formulas, security protocols. He's been mapping out my schedule, Lily's schedule, even our route home. Jake felt cold clarity settle over him. This was what he'd been afraid of for 10 years. David Sterling had let him live with his guilt, let him think he was safe, and now the debt was coming due. He's going to come after Lily to get to you, to hurt you through your daughter, the way he thinks I hurt his brother. Victoria's jaw tightened. Let him try. I have security. Security won't stop him. Jake's voice was hard. I know David. He's patient. He's smart. And he doesn't care who he has to go through to get what he wants. You need to go to the police. And tell them what? That a man who's legally dead is plotting something based on my paranoid interpretation of some computer files? Victoria shook her head. They'll think I'm hysterical. The truth is, I don't have enough proof for a restraining order, let alone an arrest. She looked at Jake with something that might have been desperation or determination, he couldn't tell which. But you know him. You know how he thinks. Help me protect my daughter. Every instinct Jake had screamed at him to say no, to walk away, to keep his head down like he'd been doing for a decade. But then he thought about Lily, sitting in the rain, about the way she'd looked at him with those old, wise eyes. He thought about Sophie upstairs, angry and hurting, and so desperately needing proof that her father was still someone worth believing in. He thought about his wife, bleeding out on a dark street because David Sterling wanted Jake to know what loss felt like. "I'll help you," Jake said. "But you need to understand something. I'm not a good man. The things I did, the choices I made, they got people killed, including my wife. If you let me into your life, into Lily's life, you're taking a risk." Victoria stood up and extended her hand. "Jake, we both know the biggest risk is doing nothing, so let's do something." They shook on it, and Jake felt the weight of old promises and new debts settling across his shoulders like chains. Outside, clouds were gathering again, and somewhere in the city, David Sterling was planning his revenge. The game had begun, and this time, Jake couldn't afford to lose. The next 72 hours moved with the surreal quality of a nightmare Jake couldn't wake up from. Victoria hired him as Lily's temporary caregiver and bodyguard, a cover story that gave him legitimate access to their home and schedule while allowing him to watch for threats. He moved through her world like a ghost, cataloging exits and vulnerabilities, seeing danger in every shadow. The Parker mansion sat in an exclusive neighborhood where the houses had gates and the silence was expensive. Lily's room overlooked a garden that probably cost more to maintain than Jake's yearly income, and security cameras dotted the property like mechanical sentries. But Jake knew cameras could be disabled, guards could be bribed, and walls only kept out the threats you could see coming. He spent his days with Lily, playing quiet games and reading books while his mind worked through scenarios. She asked him questions about everything: why the sky was blue, how birds knew where to fly, whether he believed in second chances. That last one made him pause. "I think," he said carefully, "that second chances are something you have to earn, not something you just get because you want them." Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Then you must have earned yours. Otherwise you wouldn't be here helping us." The simple faith in her voice made Jake want to weep. His evenings were spent with Victoria, going over David Sterling's known associates, his habits, his weaknesses. She was sharp and focused, asking the right questions, never letting emotion cloud her judgment. But Jake could see the fear underneath. Every time her phone rang, every unexpected noise, she flinched. "Tell me about the night your wife died," Victoria said on the third evening. They were in her home office, surrounded by files and photographs. "Tell me what really happened." Jake didn't want to revisit that memory, but he owed her the truth. "I took David's money to look the other way during a raid. His brother was dealing drugs, and David wanted him out before the arrest. I falsified paperwork, created a gap in surveillance. The brother escaped, got into a firefight with another unit, and died. David blamed me for not protecting him better. Said I'd taken his money and his brother." He paused, the rest of the story rising like bile. 3 months later, I came home and found my wife bleeding out on our doorstep. She'd been shot, execution style. The investigating officers called it a random mugging, but I knew. There was a note in her hand, written in David's handwriting. It said, "Now you know what it costs." Victoria's face had gone pale. "And you didn't tell anyone?" Who would believe me? David Sterling was already dead according to official records. I had no proof, and if I admitted I'd recognized his handwriting, I'd have to explain why, which meant confessing to corruption and getting sent to prison. So I kept quiet, got myself fired for being drunk on duty, and tried to disappear. Tried to be someone Sophie could depend on. His voice cracked. "But she just sees a coward who couldn't save her mother." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the desk and gripped his hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." But was it? Jake wasn't sure anymore. That night, lying on the guest room bed and staring at the ceiling, he thought about all the ways this could go wrong. David Sterling wasn't just coming for revenge, he was coming to prove a point. To show Jake that no matter how far he ran, the past would always catch up. To demonstrate that every person Jake cared about was vulnerable, including Sophie. The thought made him sit up abruptly. Sophie, he'd left her with Mrs. Clara, the neighbor who sometimes watched her when he worked late. She was safe, he told himself. David didn't know about her, didn't know where Jake lived now, but certainty felt like quicksand, and Jake couldn't shake the cold dread settling into his bones. He grabbed his phone and called Mrs. Clora. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He called again. And again. On the 4th try, someone picked up. But it wasn't Mrs. Clora. "Hello, Jake." David Sterling's voice was exactly as Jake remembered, smooth, cultured, with an edge like a razor wrapped in silk. "It's been a long time." Jake's blood turned to ice. "Where's my daughter?" "Safe. For now." There was a smile in David's voice, the kind predators wore when they had prey cornered. "Your neighbor is sleeping peacefully, by the way. Just a mild sedative. I'm not a monster, Jake. I only hurt the people who deserve it. If you touch Sophie, you'll what? Turn yourself in? Call the police? We both know how well that worked last time." David's tone hardened. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to deliver something to me. The formula Victoria Parker has been developing the heart medication worth billions on the black market. You have 12 hours to bring it to me, along with $50 million in bearer bonds from her company safe. Do that, and you get your daughter back. You get to play hero again, Jake. Doesn't that sound nice?" Jake's mind raced. "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't access that kind of money or steal corporate formulas. Victoria would never. Then I guess you'll have to be persuasive. Or creative. I don't particularly care which." David paused. "Oh, and Jake, I have Lily too. Grabbed her from the garden about an hour ago. Your security cameras have a convenient blind spot near the south wall. So now Victoria has to choose help you save both girls, or watch you scramble while I make her little girl disappear." Tick-tock. The line went dead. For 10 seconds, Jake couldn't move. His brain simply refused to process what he'd just heard. Then training kicked in, cold, methodical. The part of him that used to be a good cop before corruption rotted him from the inside. He sprinted down the hallway to Victoria's office and burst through the door without knocking. She looked up, startled, and whatever she saw in his face made her stand up immediately. "What happened?" "David has both girls, Sophie and Lily. He wants the formula and $50 million. We have 12 hours. Victoria's face went sheet white, but her voice stayed steady. "Then we give him what he wants. It won't matter. He'll kill them anyway. That's his play, make us desperate, make us deliver what he wants, then take everything. He wants me to know I failed again. He wants you to suffer for firing him, for being successful, for being everything his brother could have been." Jake was pacing now, his mind tearing through options and discarding them. "We need to find where he's keeping them." Victoria was already moving, pulling up programs on her computer. "Lily has a medical alert device sewn into her jacket. It's GPS-enabled for emergencies. If she's still wearing it," she typed frantically, and a map bloomed on the screen. A red dot pulsed in an industrial area across town, near the old manufacturing district where buildings sat abandoned and city oversight was minimal. "There," Victoria breathed. "That's where she is." Jake studied the location. "It's a trap. He knows about the tracker, which means he's counting on us coming. He'll have people, weapons, contingency plans. Then we call the police. Right now. We have proof. We have a GPS signal and my word against a dead man's." Jake shook his head. "By the time we convince anyone to move, it'll be too late. David's smart. He'll have a deadline, a trigger. The second those 12 hours are up, the girls are gone." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. "Then what do we do?" Jake looked at her, this strong, brilliant woman who'd built an empire but couldn't protect her daughter from the ghosts of his past, and made a decision. "You're going to call someone. Someone with real power. Someone you trust completely. FBI, if you have that connection. Tell them everything. Show them David's photo, the GPS, my testimony. Get them moving, even if it takes time." "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to get our daughters back." Victoria stepped toward him. "Not alone. You can't." "Yes, alone, because David wants me, not you. If you show up, he'll know we didn't bring the formula, and he'll kill them just to make a point. But if I show up... Jake felt something cold and certain settle over him. If I show up and offer him what he really wants me, confessing everything, begging for mercy, maybe I can buy enough time for your FBI friends to arrive. Maybe I can distract him long enough to get the girls out. That's suicide. Maybe. Jake managed a grim smile. But I've been dead for 10 years anyway. At least this way, it means something. Victoria grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You don't get to play martyr and call it redemption, Jake Morrison. You want to save those girls? Fine. But you do it smart, and you do it with backup, and you don't you dare die before we win. You understand me? Jake saw tears in her eyes, saw the fear and the rage and the desperate hope all tangled together. He thought about his wife, about all the ways he'd failed her. He thought about Sophie, growing up thinking her father was a coward. And he thought about Lily, asking him if he believed in second chances. I understand, he said quietly. Make your calls. I'll stall as long as I can. Victoria pulled out her phone, already dialing. As Jake turned to leave, she called after him. Jake? That medication I'm developing? The heart formula David wants? He paused at the door. The research is years from completion. Whatever he thinks he'll get, whatever he thinks he'll sell, it doesn't exist yet. He's chasing smoke, but he doesn't need to know that. Jake nodded slowly. David Sterling was risking everything for a formula that couldn't even be manufactured. The irony was almost funny. Almost. He took Victoria's car faster than his ancient truck and drove through the empty streets with his headlights off until the industrial district swallowed him whole. The building where Lily's tracker signal originated was a hulking concrete shell, 4 stories of broken windows and rust-streaked walls. Jake parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, every sense hyper-alert. The night smelled like oil and decay. Distant sirens echoed somewhere, but they might as well have been on another planet. This was the kind of place where people disappeared, where violence happened in shadows and nobody looked too closely. The main entrance was chained shut, but a side door hung open like an invitation. Jake slipped inside, moving through the darkness with the muscle memory of 1,000 crime scenes. Somewhere above him, he heard voices. A child crying, Sophie, he thought, and his heart clenched. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, silent as smoke, and emerged into a vast empty floor where moonlight spilled through shattered skylights. David Sterling stood in the center of the space, looking exactly as he had 10 years ago except for the gray threading through his hair. He smiled when he saw Jake. Right on time. I'd say you're predictable, but we both know it's just that you care too much. That was always your weakness. Jake's eyes swept the room, cataloging threats. 2 men flanked David, both armed. Sophie and Lily were tied to chairs near the far wall, both crying but alive. Relief hit Jake so hard he nearly staggered. Let them go, David. This is between us. Is it? David began to circle, lazy and confident. See, I've been thinking about that for 10 years. About what justice really looks like. I could have killed you quickly, Jake. Could have put a bullet in your head the night I killed your wife. But where's the lesson in that? He spread his hands. I wanted you to live with what you'd done. To wake up every day knowing you destroyed your family for a few $1,000s. To watch your daughter grow up hating you. That's real punishment. Jake forced himself to stay calm. You got your revenge. Now let the girls go, and I'll give you whatever you want. Whatever I want. David laughed, and the sound echoed off empty walls. What I want is my brother back. What I want is the life you stole from me. Can you give me that, Jake? No, but I can give you the truth. Your brother died because he made bad choices, because he thought dealing drugs and hurting people had no consequences. I made it easier for him to run, and I'll carry that guilt forever. But his death isn't on me, it's on him, and you know it. Something flickered across David's face, rage or recognition. Jake couldn't tell which. Then it hardened into something uglier. The truth, David said softly. is that you're a corrupt cop who sold his soul and got people killed. And now, you're going to watch me take everything else you care about, starting with these two innocent girls." He pulled a gun from his jacket and pointed it at Lily. "Unless you want to beg, Jake. Unless you want to get on your knees and tell me how sorry you are. Maybe that's worth something." Jake didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees, hands raised. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For taking your money. For failing your brother. For being too much of a coward to make it right. You win, David. Just please don't hurt them." David studied him for a long moment, and Jake saw the calculation happening. This was what David wanted: total submission, complete victory. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough, because grief didn't work that way. You couldn't balance the scales with pain. You couldn't bring the dead back by creating more death. "Do you know what the worst part is?" David said, and his voice shook slightly. "I actually believe you're sorry. I believe you regret what you did. But it doesn't matter, Jake. Because sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give me my brother back." He cocked the gun. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to watch me shoot one of these girls. Then you'll have 5 minutes to decide: bring me the formula and the money, or I shoot the other one. Your choice. Your punishment." Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw David's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw Sophie's tear-streaked face, her eyes wide with terror. Saw Lily trembling in her chair, trying so hard to be brave. And he saw, with perfect clarity, what he had to do. He launched himself forward with every ounce of strength he had, closing the distance between him and David in 3 long strides. The gun went off a deafening crack in the enclosed space, and Jake felt fire tear through his shoulder. But momentum carried him forward, and he crashed into David, sending them both sprawling. They hit the concrete hard, and the gun skittered away. Jake, half blind with pain, drove his fist into David's face once, twice, 3 times. Blood filled his mouth, his own or David's, he couldn't tell. Behind him, he heard shouts and running feet. David's men, coming to their boss's aid. Jake grabbed David by the collar and hauled him up, using him as a human shield. "Back off!" His voice was raw. "Back off, or I break his neck right here!" The men hesitated, weapons raised, caught between following orders and protecting their employer. In that frozen moment, Jake heard the sweetest sound of his life sirens. Multiple sirens, getting closer. Victoria's FBI contact had come through after all. "It's over, David," Jake said, his voice thick with exhaustion and blood loss. "You can kill me, but you're not touching those girls. Not today, not ever." David's expression twisted into something between fury and despair. For just a second, Jake thought he saw his old adversary in there, the man before grief had poisoned him. Then it was gone, replaced by cold hatred. This isn't over. It'll never be over. The rest of his threat was cut off as FBI agents poured into the building, tactical lights and shouted commands filling the space. Jake released David and stumbled towards Sophie, his legs barely holding him. He fell to his knees in front of her chair and fumbled with the ropes binding her wrists. His hands were shaking too badly to work the knots, but then Victoria was there, pushing him aside gently and freeing both girls with quick, efficient movements. Sophie threw herself into Jake's arms, sobbing against his good shoulder, and he held her with his working arm while the world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry for everything." "You came for me," Sophie said, her voice muffled. "You came. Always," Jake promised. "I'll always come for you." Across the room, Victoria had Lily wrapped in her arms, both of them crying. FBI agents were cuffing David Sterling and reading him his rights. Jake heard phrases like kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon and fugitive from justice, but they seemed distant and unimportant. What mattered was that the girls were safe. What mattered was that for once, finally, he'd done something right. An EMT appeared at his elbow, trying to examine his shoulder, but Jake waved them off. "The girls first. Make sure they're okay." Victoria looked over at him, and their eyes met across the chaotic space. In that moment, Jake saw understanding pass between them, two parents who'd faced the worst thing imaginable and come out the other side. Not unscathed, but alive. Together. "Thank you," Victoria mouthed. Jake just nodded. He didn't have the words yet. Maybe he never would. As the FBI led David Sterling away in handcuffs, the man looked back one last time. Jake expected to see hatred, expected more threats or curses, but what he saw was something else. Exhaustion. Release. Like a man who'd been carrying a weight for so long that he'd forgotten what freedom felt like. "It's done," David said quietly, and Jake wasn't sure if he was talking to him or to the ghost of his brother. "It's finally done." Then he was gone, swallowed by federal custody and a legal system that would ensure he never threatened anyone again. Jake let the EMTs work on his shoulder, let them bandage and stabilize and mutter about surgery. Sophie stayed pressed against his side the whole time, and he kept his good arm around her, anchoring them both to this moment. Victoria sat nearby with Lily, who had fallen asleep against her mother's chest. When their eyes met again, Victoria smiled, tired and fragile but genuine. "I'm going to recommend you for a civilian commendation. What you did tonight was what anyone would do," Jake interrupted. Victoria shook her head. "No, it's what a hero does. It's what a good man does, even when he thinks he stopped being good a long time ago." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to list all the ways he'd failed and fallen short. But Sophie squeezed his hand and whispered, "Dad?" She hadn't called him that in 3 years. He looked down at her, and she looked back with eyes that still held hurt, but also something new. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of forgiveness. "Yeah, sweetheart. Can we go home now?" Home. Such a simple word, but it felt like the most important thing anyone had ever said to him. "Yeah," Jake said, his voice rough. "Let's go home." The weeks that followed were a strange kind of limbo, where nothing felt quite real. Jake's shoulder healed slowly. Physical therapy sessions punctuated by visits from FBI agents taking statements and building their case against David Sterling. The media picked up the story corrupt cop turned hero, wealthy CEO's daughter rescued, but Victoria used her considerable influence to keep the details vague and the cameras away from the girls. What mattered more were the small changes. Sophie started talking to him again, really talking, about school and friends and the nightmares she still had about the night in that warehouse. Jake listened and apologized, and tried to be present in a way he hadn't managed since her mother died. It wasn't easy. Some days Sophie still looked at him with suspicion, still flinched away from his touch. But other days, she'd climb into his lap while he did paperwork for the diner, and they'd sit in comfortable silence that felt like progress. Victoria became a regular at the diner, bringing Lily in for hot chocolate and grilled cheese sandwiches that became their ritual. She and Jake talked about their daughters, about David Sterling's trial, about all the ways life could break you down and build you back up differently. Gradually, something shifted between them. Not romance exactly, but connection, understanding. The recognition that they'd walked through fire together and come out branded by the same flames. One afternoon, 6 weeks after the rescue, Victoria showed up with an unexpected proposition. She slid a folder across the diner counter while Lily and Sophie played checkers in the corner booth, their laughter punctuating the afternoon quiet. "I'm starting a new division at Parker Pharmaceuticals," Victoria said. "Corporate security and risk management. I need someone to head it up. Someone who understands how criminals think, who can see threats before they materialize. Someone I can trust completely." Jake stared at the folder without opening it. "Victoria, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not qualified for, you saved my daughter's life. You risked everything when you had every reason to walk away. You're exactly what I need." She leaned forward. "Jake, I'm not offering this out of gratitude or pity. I'm offering it because you're good at this. Because you understand security in a way most people never will. And because I think you could use a second chance at the career you lost." Jake opened the folder slowly. Inside was a job description, a salary that made his head spin, and a personal note in Victoria's handwriting. "Everyone deserves the chance to prove who they really are." He thought about the diner, about the quiet life he'd built from the wreckage of his old one. He thought about Sophie, and whether uprooting her again would cause more harm than good. But mostly he thought about the man he'd been 10 years ago, the detective who'd let corruption poison him, who'd made choices he could never take back. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe this was his chance to prove that man didn't have to be who he became. "I need to talk to Sophie first," Jake said finally. "Need to make sure she's okay with this." Victoria smiled. "Of course. Take your time." That evening, Jake sat Sophie down in their small apartment above the diner and laid out Victoria's offer. He explained what the job would mean: better money, different hours, the chance to do work that mattered. Sophie listened with that serious expression she'd inherited from her mother, the one that meant she was thinking hard about something. "Would we have to move?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "Not if you don't want to. We could stay here, or we could find someplace new. It's up to you." Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you want to do it? Take the job?" "I want to be someone you're proud of," Jake said carefully. "I want to prove that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define you forever. You already proved that." Sophie's voice was small but certain. "When you saved me and Lily, when you fought that bad man even though you were scared, that's when I knew you were still my dad. The real one, not the sad one who couldn't look at me." Jake felt his eyes burn. "I'm sorry I was that person for so long. I'm sorry you had to grow up watching me fall apart. But you put yourself back together." Sophie reached out and took his hand. "And if this job helps you keep being better, then I think you should take it. Besides, Lily's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind seeing her more." Jake laughed, the sound wet and rough. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." She grinned, and for a moment, Jake saw his wife's smile looking back at him. The next morning, he called Victoria and accepted the job. 2 months later, Jake Morrison walked into Parker Pharmaceuticals, wearing his first suit in a decade, feeling like an imposter in borrowed clothes. But Victoria met him in the lobby with Lily, who'd drawn him a welcome card covered in glitter and misspelled encouragement, and Sophie had hugged him extra tight that morning, whispering, "Good luck." Dad against his shoulder. He thought about David Sterling, serving multiple life sentences in federal prison. They'd exchanged one letter after the trial, David writing to say he didn't forgive Jake but understood why he'd done what he did. That saving those girls didn't erase the past, but maybe it balanced the scales a little. Jake had written back with the only truth he knew, that carrying guilt was easy, but carrying change was harder. That redemption wasn't a moment, but a choice you made every single day. That he'd spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Standing in Parker Pharmaceuticals that first day, surrounded by the hum of progress and possibility, Jake understood something fundamental. The past didn't disappear. His wife was still gone, his mistakes still made, his corruption still real. But the present was happening now, and the future was unwritten. He had a daughter who trusted him again. He had work that mattered. He had Victoria's friendship and Lily's laughter and the slow, painful, beautiful process of becoming someone he could respect. That evening, he picked Sophie up from school and took her to their favorite park. They sat on the swings as the sun set, not saying much, just being together. "Dad?" Sophie said after a while. "Yeah? I'm glad you didn't give up, even when things were really bad. I'm glad you kept trying." Jake felt something unlock in his chest, some last piece of frozen grief finally beginning to thaw. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They swung higher, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Above them, the sky turned gold and purple, and somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with countless lives intersecting and diverging. Jake thought about all the choices that had led him here, the good ones and the terrible ones, the moments of weakness and the moments of strength. He thought about the girl he'd found sitting in the rain, and how that single act of kindness had set off a chain reaction that changed everything. Second chances, he realized, weren't about forgetting who you'd been. They were about remembering and choosing to be better anyway. They were about looking at your worst self and saying, "Not anymore." They were about the slow, unglamorous work of showing up every day and trying to do right by the people who still believed in you. "Race you to the top," Sophie called, pumping her legs harder. Jake laughed and matched her pace, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt something that might have been joy. Not happiness exactly, that was still too distant, too tangled up with loss, but joy, the kind that existed in moments, in the sound of his daughter's laughter and the warmth of the setting sun. The kind that said, "You're still here, you're still fighting, and that matters." They swung until the streetlights flickered on and the park emptied around them. When they finally walked home, Jake reached out and took Sophie's hand, and she let him. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.